The Galactic Council had been discussing peace with Earth for what felt like weeks, but it was clear to everyone that the talks were going nowhere. The diplomats sat around a massive table, voices echoing in the large sterile chamber. Representatives from different alien species filled the room, their eyes flickering with impatience. Among them was a human representative named Alan Price. He had been Earth's primary negotiator for these peace talks, and he was growing tired. Tired of the same demands, the same promises with no action, and the same arrogant behavior from the Council. They thought of humanity as a young species, barely out of its infancy in the grand scheme of the universe. They assumed Earth's people were naive, easily manipulated, and weak. Alan had tried to keep his cool for the past several weeks, but something inside him was breaking. The Council had made it clear that they wanted more from Earth, more resources, more technology, more space. Every day they pressed for something else, and humanity's patience was wearing thin. Alan glanced around the table, seeing the same arrogance on the faces of the Council members. They weren't even trying to hide their sense of superiority anymore. They were so convinced of their own power that they hadn't even bothered to offer any real compromise. They didn't care about Earth's people, about its needs, its struggles. They just saw Earth as a planet ripe for exploitation. The Galactic Council had been accustomed to getting what they wanted from the younger races of the galaxy, and they thought they could do the same with Earth. At that moment, Alan's heart raced. The tension in the room was suffocating, and the anger he had been holding back for so long finally started to rise. He stood up, slamming his hand on the table. The noise echoed through the room, cutting through the discussions. All eyes turned to him, surprised by the sudden outburst. But Alan didn't care. He was done being polite, done playing their game. "We're not your servants," he shouted, his voice booming through the chamber. The Council members were silent, shocked by the outburst. Alan's eyes burned with fury as he continued. "You've been demanding, threatening, and manipulating us for far too long. We came here hoping for peace, but you've shown us nothing but contempt. You think we're weak because we've tried to avoid conflict, but you've underestimated us. We are not going to sit here and let you trample over us anymore." The Council sat in stunned silence. It wasn't just Alan's words that shocked them, but the intensity in his eyes. There was something in his expression, something they hadn't expected from humanity, a fire that burned deep inside them, a force that no amount of pressure or negotiation could extinguish. For the first time in weeks, the room was quiet. No one spoke. The arrogance of the Council members faltered for a brief moment. The other representatives from the different alien species in the room exchanged uneasy glances. One of the Council's leaders, a tall reptilian alien named Exarchan, finally broke the silence. His voice was smooth and cold, his alien eyes narrowing. "Humanity is getting too bold for its own good," Exarchan said. "This is not how things are done. You are a young species, and you have no right to speak to us this way." Alan's hand tightened into a fist, but he didn't back down. "We've listened to you for far too long. We've played along with your demands, your petty rules, and your negotiations, but no more. If you want peace, it has to be on our terms now, and you will listen." The other members of the Council murmured, clearly uncomfortable. They hadn't expected this. For the first time, they saw that Earth wasn't going to cower before them, like all the other weaker species they had dealt with in the past. Alan took a deep breath, his voice steadying as he spoke again, more calmly this time. "We are offering one last chance for peace, but if you refuse to meet our demands, if you continue to push us, we will have no choice but to fight back. You've pushed us too far." Sarkin's face twisted into a sneer. "You think you can threaten us, Earth? We control the galaxy. You are nothing." Alan met Tarkin's gaze with unwavering resolve. "No, we are something. We are human, and we will not bow to anyone, not even to you." The room grew tense once more, the atmosphere thick with uncertainty. The Council had expected this to be just another negotiation, another chance to force Earth into compliance, but humanity wasn't bending. The threat of war was in the air, but there was something more, something deeper, something that sent a chill down the spines of those present. The Council had never considered the possibility that humanity could resist them. They were too used to seeing other species crumble under their pressure. But here, in this room, they were faced with a human who would not back down. Alan stood tall, his gaze sweeping across the Council members. "We've had enough of your games. If you want to continue this war of words, fine. But know this, Earth has resources you've never dreamed of. Technology you can't even begin to comprehend. And we're not afraid to use it." For a moment, there was no response. The silence in the room was deafening. Alan could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of what was happening. He knew that this was the point of no return. The Council had pushed humanity to the edge, and now the humans were responding in a way they hadn't anticipated. There was no going back. Finally, Zarkin spoke again, his voice low and threatening. "You have made a grave mistake, human. The galaxy will remember this." Alan met his gaze, unflinching. "Good. Let the galaxy remember. Let them see what happens when you push humanity too far." Without waiting for a response, Alan turned and walked out of the room, his mind already racing with what would come next. He knew the peace talks were over. And he knew that the Council would never believe what humanity was capable of. The galaxy had no idea what was coming, but it would soon find out. Back on Earth, the moment the transmission ended, the leaders of the human government watched in silence. They had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it. Alan's words had been a warning. But now, they would prepare for the next phase. There would be no more talks, no more negotiations. Humanity was done being patient, and if the Council didn't understand that, then they would learn it the hard way. As Alan walked out of the Council chamber, he could feel the weight of the decision that had just been made. This wasn't just about Earth anymore. This was about sending a message to the entire galaxy. Humanity would no longer be a passive player. They would make their own rules now. The Council had pushed them too far, and now they would see what happened when humanity's patience ran out. The universe was about to change, and humanity was going to be the one to change it. The Galactic Council sat in their grand, circular chamber, filled with representatives from the most powerful species across the galaxy. The atmosphere was tense, as discussions had been dragging on for weeks. Humanity had sent its best and brightest diplomats. But despite their efforts, the talks seemed to be going nowhere. Alan Price, Earth's lead negotiator, sat at the table, feeling the weight of every passing second. The Council had already made it clear what they wanted: more resources from Earth, technology transfers, and access to Earth's colonies. They were pushing for total control over humanity's future. But Earth had been clear from the start. Humanity would not be their servants. Still, every day the demands grew. Alan glanced at the faces of the alien delegates around the table, each of them seeming more impatient than the last. Khan, the leader of the Council, a towering reptilian being with cold, calculating eyes, was once again speaking. His words were smooth, yet they carried an undercurrent of disdain for humanity. "Humanity's progress is commendable, but you are young," Khan said in his deep, rasping voice. "Your technology is impressive, but it lacks the refinement that we have honed over millennia. You must understand, we offer you a chance to evolve faster, to join the ranks of the greater galactic civilizations. All we ask in return is cooperation. Surely, you do not want to fall behind." Alan's hands clenched into fists. His patience, which had been stretched thin over the last few weeks, was now close to breaking. The Council had already taken enough from Earth, and still, they wanted more. Earth had been patient, compliant even, but no more. Alan knew that this wasn't just about resources or technology. It was about control. They saw Earth as a prize, a planet to be exploited. The humans had given their time, their trust, but the council had shown no respect. He cleared his throat, his voice steady but firm. Xarkin, we've heard your offer, and while I understand the position you take, it's clear to me and to Earth that your proposal is one-sided. You demand resources, technology, and power, and in return, what do we get? Empty promises and empty threats. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Alan's words echoed, and for the first time in weeks, the council's members stopped speaking, their gazes turning toward him. Alan could feel the tension in the room, like a storm cloud ready to burst. You are asking us to hand over our future, Alan continued, his voice growing more resolute. You want to control our resources, our people, and our future. And for what? So that you can make a few more allies. So you can say that Earth is just another piece in your empire. No, Xarkin, we will not stand for it. Xarkin's eyes narrowed, a faint flicker of anger crossing his face. But he quickly masked it, his tone colder than before. You mistake our offer, human. This is not an act of subjugation. It is a gift. You should be grateful for the chance to ascend. Your species cannot survive on its own in the galaxy. You are too small, too divided. Alan stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The room seemed to freeze. He didn't care about protocol anymore. The words had been building up inside him for weeks, and now they came pouring out. Do you hear yourself? Alan's voice rang out, sharp and defiant. You think we're weak, that we're too small to stand up to you. You underestimate us. We don't need you or your gifts to survive. You came here, expecting Earth to bow down. But that's not how it works anymore. If you want to take something from us, you'll have to take it by force. The council members looked shocked, some leaning back in their chairs as though they'd just been slapped. The tension in the room grew thicker, like the calm before a storm. Alan's chest was heaving with anger, but there was something else too, a sense of clarity. The moment of decision had arrived. Xarkin sneered. You speak of resistance, but you have no idea what you're provoking. You are nothing but a tiny speck in the vastness of the galaxy. Do you really believe that Earth can stand up to the might of the Galactic Council? Alan held his ground, meeting Xarkin's cold gaze. Maybe we are small, but we're not afraid. And we'll never back down. Not to you, not to anyone. He took a step forward, his voice lowering but gaining strength with each word. Humanity has spent years trying to avoid conflict, trying to find a peaceful way forward. But you've pushed us to the edge, and now you'll see what happens when you push a human too far. The room was silent, save for the quiet hum of the galactic systems surrounding the council's chamber. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Alan knew that the moment had passed the point of no return. The council had underestimated Earth, and they were about to pay for that mistake. Xarkin's eyes flashed with contempt. You are making a grave mistake, human. The galaxy will remember your defiance, and the consequences will be severe. Alan's lips curled into a grim smile. Let them remember. Let them see what happens when they underestimate humanity. You've made your choice. Now it's time for us to make ours. Without another word, Alan turned and walked toward the door. He didn't look back. The moment he stepped out into the hallway, the weight of what he had just done sank in. There was no going back now. The peace talks were over. The negotiations had failed. Earth would fight. Alan didn't know what the future held, but he knew this. Humanity had just sent a message to the entire galaxy. No longer would they be a helpless, quiet species. No longer would they submit. The Galactic Council had crossed a line, and now they would see what it meant to face humanity's wrath. Back in the chamber, Xarkin watched the human leave. His expression remained cold, but inside, his mind was racing. He had thought Earth was just another weak, insignificant planet. But now, after hearing Alan's words, he realized the truth. Humanity was not to be underestimated. He was no longer sure that the Council had the strength to crush Earth's spirit. Something inside him shifted. Fear, perhaps, or maybe respect. It was the first time that the Galactic Council had faced a species like humanity. The storm was coming, and no one in the galaxy knew how to prepare for it. Alan Price had made sure of that. The days after Alan's explosive outburst in the Galactic Council chamber were filled with a sense of uneasy anticipation. The moment Earth's message had been sent, the atmosphere had shifted, not just in the Council chambers, but across the entire galaxy. Back on Earth, the news had spread like wildfire. People from all walks of life, from the bustling streets of New York to the quiet corners of rural villages, knew that humanity's fate had changed forever. The world had just taken a stand, and it was a stand that would echo across the stars. In the vast, cold control room deep beneath the Earth's surface, government officials and military leaders were already moving. They knew the peace talks had failed, but what came next was the real question. The first step had been made. Humanity had made its stance clear, but there was still much to be done. Alan Price's words had struck a chord across the planet. In every corner of Earth, people felt a surge of pride, anger, and determination. The world had always feared the consequences of standing up to the galaxy's greatest powers. But now, there was no turning back. In a secure, dimly lit conference room, military commanders sat in silence, the air thick with tension. The massive screens on the wall flashed with holographic projections of various galactic systems as the generals discussed the next steps. Alan's bold declaration had rattled the Galactic Council, but it was still unclear what kind of response Earth could expect. Would they retaliate? Would the Council attempt to crush Earth's resistance with overwhelming force? There were so many unknowns, and the stakes had never been higher. General Martin, the leader of Earth's military forces, leaned forward, his fingers tapping restlessly on the edge of the table. "We have no choice but to prepare for the worst. The Council doesn't tolerate defiance. If we want to survive this, we need to show them that we're ready for war. And not just any war. We need to show them that humanity won't just fight. We'll fight back like no other species has before." The room nodded in agreement, the sense of gravity in the air palpable. They had been underestimating humanity's resolve for so long. Now it was time to show the galaxy what Earth was truly capable of. Meanwhile, in the dark expanse of space, the Council members were facing their own crisis. The messages from Earth had reached their fleets, and the response from the human diplomat, Alan Price, had stirred something in them that they had never expected. For the first time in years, fear began to creep into their ranks. They had believed Earth was just another primitive species, weak, divided, and incapable of standing up to the might of the galaxy's greatest civilizations. But Alan had made them realize something they hadn't accounted for. Humanity wasn't weak. Humanity was stubborn, resourceful, and relentless. Arkan, the leader of the Council, stood in front of a large screen that displayed Earth's position in the galaxy. His cold, reptilian eyes narrowed as he analyzed the data. It wasn't just Alan's words that had shaken him. It was the fact that Earth had been silently building strength over the past decades. Their technology, while not as advanced as the Council's, had progressed at an astonishing rate. And their spirit, Arkan had underestimated that. Humanity had survived countless hardships, from global wars to pandemics to natural disasters. They had an uncanny ability to adapt, to fight, and to survive. That was a force the Council had failed to understand. "What are we going to do?" A voice interrupted Arkan's thoughts. It was Yusil, a delegate from the Joran species, a tall, insectoid alien whose antennae twitched nervously. "Earth's resistance will be difficult to crush. They have no fear of dying. Their spirit is unlike anything we've encountered." Zarkan's voice was a low growl. "We will break them as we have broken others. They are just another species, like the rest. But they have made a grave mistake. They will learn that defying the Galactic Council is not an option." But even as he said the words, a flicker of doubt lingered in the back of his mind. The human diplomats had made it clear that Earth would not be pushed any longer, and if the Council wasn't careful, they might find themselves facing a rebellion far larger than they could ever imagine. Back on Earth, the political leaders were in a state of high alert. The President of the United States, seated in the Oval Office, was surrounded by his closest advisors. The news of the failed peace talks had reached the highest levels of government, and the decision to abandon negotiations had been made. Alan's words had been decisive, but now, the next move was crucial. Earth had made a declaration of war, but no one knew exactly what form that war would take. "We need to strengthen our defenses immediately," the President said, his voice firm, yet tinged with the gravity of the situation. "We have no idea what the Council is capable of, but we do know that we can't afford to wait for them to make the first move." The Defense Secretary nodded. "We've already begun mobilizing our fleets, sir, but we'll need every ship, every resource we have to stand a chance against the Council, and we need to prepare for their retaliation." Across the globe, governments scrambled to prepare their people. Military forces began training, and civilians were put on high alert. For the first time in decades, Earth was united, not just by fear, but by a collective sense of purpose. The human spirit was alive, burning with the fury of those who had been pushed too far. Humanity had learned to endure, to survive, but now they were prepared to fight back. The Council's hubris had brought them to this point, and now they would see what humanity could do when backed into a corner. As the days passed, the world watched in anxious silence. Satellites began to pick up signs of strange activity in the far reaches of space, movement from the Galactic Council's fleets. The galaxy was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. But Earth wasn't waiting. Earth was preparing. And if the Council underestimated them once again, they would regret it. The human military worked around the clock, upgrading old ships, building new ones, and reinforcing Earth's defenses. The once dormant space programs were revived, and scientists worked tirelessly to unlock new technologies. Humanity was no longer the underdog. It had become the storm. And as the Galactic Council's massive fleets moved closer, readying themselves for the inevitable confrontation, they had no idea what awaited them. They had thought the peace talks were just another game to play, but now they would realize that humanity didn't play by the same rules. When Earth ended peace talks, it wasn't just a message to the Council, it was a declaration of war, and humanity wasn't backing down. The weeks that followed Alan Price's bold declaration were a whirlwind of preparations. Earth had always prided itself on being a species capable of diplomacy, but now, humanity was being forced to adapt to a new reality. They could no longer rely on words or peace. They had made their stand, and now they would face the consequences. In a hidden military base, located beneath the surface of the Canadian Rockies, General Martin stood over a large holographic map, his eyes scanning the coordinates. Around him, military officials worked with feverish intensity, their focus unbroken. The Galactic Council's fleets were slowly advancing, their ships massive and imposing, capable of wiping out entire planets in the blink of an eye. And yet here they were, preparing to face the unknown. "We don't know what they're capable of," General Martin muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "But we have to be ready for anything." One of the scientists, Dr. Isabel Klein, a top researcher from Earth's most prestigious space research organization, approached with a worried expression. "Sir, we've been tracking the Council's fleets. They've pulled together the largest fleet we've ever seen. This could be disastrous for us if we're not prepared." General Martin gave her a nod, his face grim. "We're not prepared yet, but we will be. We've got one advantage the Council doesn't see coming. Humanity has something they can't understand." Dr. Klein raised an eyebrow, curious. "And what's that, General?" He smiled slightly. "We fight with everything we have. We're not just fighting for survival, we're fighting for something more. For our future. For everything we hold dear." Across the world, in every major military command center, humans were putting everything they had into building their forces. Earth's military had been built for defense, not war against a galactic empire. Yet in a matter of weeks, humanity had begun to create a fleet capable of holding its own, if only just. They had repurposed older ships, outfitted them with newly designed weapons, and turned civilian vessels into battle-ready crafts. But the real game-changer lay in the hands of Earth's scientists. They had worked day and night to develop something that might give them a fighting chance. A new weapon, something that could shift the balance of power. In the depths of a highly classified laboratory, a group of scientists stood around a glowing core. Dr. Klein watched them work, her pulse quickening with every passing second. The weapon they were constructing was still untested, but the technology behind it was groundbreaking. They called it the Stellar Disruptor. It was designed to disable a ship's core systems, rendering even the most powerful fleet helpless. The idea came from studying the Council's ships, how their power systems worked, their shields, and how they could be brought to their knees with the right kind of disruption. The Stellar Disruptor was still in its early phases, but it was humanity's best hope for surviving the incoming storm. Back in the command center, General Martin's voice was low, but filled with purpose. "We've got one shot at this. We're not just defending Earth. We're defending everything we stand for. If we lose this, we lose everything. We have to make sure this weapon works, and it works now." Dr. Klein nodded, biting her lip nervously. "It will work, General. We've tested it on small-scale prototypes, but using it against a full fleet, that's never been done before." Martin's gaze hardened as he turned to look at the holographic map of the Council's fleet. "We'll make it work. The Council will regret underestimating humanity." Meanwhile, on Earth's orbiting space stations, thousands of soldiers, engineers, and civilians prepared for the inevitable. The Earth Defense Force was up and running at full capacity, with thousands of ships readying themselves for battle. Across the world, nations had come together as never before. There was no longer any time for politics. Every nation, every individual, understood the stakes. This was no longer about diplomacy. It was about survival. In one of the Earth's flagship command ships, Captain Lucille Dawson, who had been appointed to lead one of the largest human fleets ever assembled, surveyed the preparations. Her ship, the Vanguard, had been retrofitted for combat, and it was now one of the most advanced warships Earth had ever built. But Captain Dawson knew that humanity was still facing an uphill battle. The Galactic Council was vast, powerful, and merciless. Their fleets numbered in the thousands, each ship a fortress of advanced technology. The humans' newly built ships were barely a match for the Council's power. But what they lacked in raw strength, they made up for in determination. She looked out the window of the command bridge, watching the stars as the fleet made its way toward the approaching threat. Her eyes narrowed. The Council had made a critical mistake by underestimating humanity. They had assumed that Earth's growing technology and willpower were a fluke. They had been wrong. As Captain Dawson stood there, she couldn't help but think about what Alan Price had said in the Council chambers. "You've pushed us to the edge. And now you'll see what happens when you push a human too far." It echoed in her mind. Humanity wasn't just fighting to defend a planet. They were fighting for everything they had ever built, everything they had worked for. And they weren't going to let it slip away. Back on Earth, the military forces began their final preparations. The world's most brilliant minds, leaders, and soldiers were all united in the same cause: to defend humanity's right to exist. In the sky above, the first ships of the Earth Defense Force had already launched into space, streaking toward the distant star systems, where the Galactic Council's fleet was poised to strike. But as humanity prepared for the confrontation, there was one thing that had not gone unnoticed. The Council's fleet was massive. They weren't just coming for Earth. They were coming to crush humanity's defiance once and for all. And yet, humanity's determination burned brighter than ever. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the clash that would determine the future of the galaxy. And then, as the day of battle arrived, the first human ships met the edge of the Council's fleets, a vast ocean of enemy warships. The moment of truth had come. Humanity's fight for survival was about to begin, and there was no turning back. The storm had arrived, and Earth was ready to face it head-on. The vast expanse of space stretched endlessly before the human fleet, a sea of blackness dotted with distant stars and the glittering lights of approaching enemy ships. The tension was thick, an invisible force pressing on everyone aboard the human warships. General Martin stood at the command center of the flagship Vanguard, his eyes focused on the holographic map showing the enemy fleet's positions. The Galactic Council's ships loomed closer, their sheer numbers almost overwhelming. This wasn't just a battle. It was the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. "Status report," General Martin barked, his voice cutting through the silence. "Fleet in position, sir. We're ready for combat," replied Captain Lucille Dawson, her voice steady but tense. She had command of the Vanguard, one of the most advanced ships Earth had ever built. The ship was equipped with the latest weaponry, shields, and technology, but no matter how advanced their ships were, they were still facing a challenge that no human had ever encountered before: an entire fleet of galactic forces trained for warfare and conquest. "We have to make the first strike count," General Martin said, his jaw tightening. "We're not going to survive a prolonged fight. Hit them hard, and hit them fast." A sudden shudder ran through the ship as the Vanguard's engines powered up, the hum vibrating through the hull. Captain Dawson turned her attention to the battle screen. The enemy fleet was only minutes away from striking. The enemy ships, a menacing mix of advanced war cruisers and massive battleships, began to form an organized formation. Their shields flickered on, a deadly aura surrounding their vessels as they prepared for the assault. To the untrained eye, it looked like an unstoppable force. But to those who had lived through humanity's darkest moments, it was nothing more than a challenge to be overcome. "We're in range, Captain," the tactical officer said. "Shields up, targeting systems locked." Captain Dawson's grip tightened around the console, her heart pounding in her chest. "On my command. Prepare to launch the stellar disruptor on my mark. If this works, we'll have a fighting chance." The human fleet moved into position, preparing to strike the first blow. The tension was almost unbearable. A single mistake could mean the end of everything they'd fought for. The lights aboard the Vanguard dimmed as the crew settled into their stations, the only sounds the rapid beeping of communication systems and the soft hum of the engines. Suddenly, the battle raged into motion. The first salvo of fire from the Council's fleet sliced through the void, beams of energy shooting through space at incredible speeds. The human fleet responded in kind, their weapons lighting up the darkness. But the Council's ships were massive, their firepower far superior to anything humanity had ever faced. The human ships shook as enemy fire battered their shields. "We've lost 2 ships in the outer ring," the voice cried out. "We're taking hits on the left flank, Captain," another officer shouted, the panic evident in his voice. "Shields are weakening." General Martin's heart raced. The human fleet was holding its ground, but they couldn't take much more of this. They had to land a decisive blow, or this battle would be over before it had truly begun. "Ready the stellar disruptor," Captain Dawson ordered, her eyes never leaving the battle screen. "Target the lead cruiser. It's the heart of their formation." The ship's main weapon, the stellar disruptor, was ready. It had never been tested in live combat, but there was no choice now. Humanity was desperate. Disruptor charging, 50%, 75%. Target locked. "Ready on your mark, Captain," the weapons officer said, his voice barely audible over the noise of the battle. "Fire." The moment the command left Captain Dawson's lips, the ship's weapons unleashed a pulse of raw energy. The stellar disruptor surged from the Vanguard, a blinding beam of energy that tore through space and slammed into the lead cruiser of the Council's fleet. For a split second, everything went quiet. Then the cruiser shuddered violently. Its shields flickered and failed, and its engines sputtered to a halt. The crew aboard the Vanguard watched, breathless, as the Council's flagship slowly drifted, lifeless. A wave of disbelief rippled through the entire fleet. "It worked," General Martin said, his voice a mixture of shock and triumph. "We've done it." But the victory was short-lived. The Galactic Council's fleet responded immediately. Without their lead ship, the remaining cruisers and battleships adjusted their formations and began to attack with renewed fury. The loss of one ship, while a blow to their pride, was not nearly enough to turn the tide of battle. Humanity's temporary advantage quickly faded as the enemy's superior numbers began to overwhelm the human fleet. "Brace for impact," Captain Dawson ordered. The Vanguard shuddered violently as enemy fire pounded their shields. "Shields at 40%, reported the tactical officer. "They're pushing us back." General Martin's mind raced. They had taken down one ship, but the Council had countless more. There had to be something else, something they hadn't anticipated. The stellar disruptor had given them a brief moment of hope, but it was clear now that it wouldn't be enough to win the war. "We can't keep this up," Captain Dawson said, her voice tight with frustration. "We need reinforcements. We need the rest of the fleet to stay in formation, but we're losing ships too quickly." General Martin's gaze flicked to the screen showing the state of the battle. It was chaos. But amidst that chaos, he noticed something, a vulnerability. The Council's ships were powerful, but they weren't invincible. There were gaps in their formation, moments where their firepower waned. If they could exploit those gaps, they might have a chance. "Captain, listen carefully," Martin said, his voice sharp and decisive. "We need to break their formation. Focus fire on their rear ships, disable their engines. Once we break them up, we can hit them where it hurts. We can't just keep firing blindly." "We're with you, General," Captain Dawson replied, her voice unwavering despite the chaos around them. The orders were given, and the human fleet shifted, changing tactics. Ships broke off into smaller groups, targeting the weak points in the Council's formation. For the first time since the battle began, the human fleet began to strike with purpose. Their attacks were swift and precise, aiming for the rear of the enemy ships, targeting engines and weak spots that could cripple their enemies without outright destroying them. The Council's formation began to break apart. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in hours, humanity felt a flicker of hope. The tide had shifted. The Council had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to think on their feet in the heat of battle. They had made a mistake, and humanity was going to make them pay for it. But as the human fleet pressed forward, the Galactic Council began to regroup, its remaining ships reorienting themselves for a counterattack. The true nature of this war was becoming clear. It wasn't just about winning battles. It was about survival. And humanity had no intention of losing. The battle raged on, its intensity growing by the minute. The silence of space was shattered by the constant roar of energy weapons and the deafening crack of exploding hulls. The human fleet, though outnumbered, had found its stride. They had taken down several enemy ships, but the Council's massive fleet wasn't backing down. They regrouped quickly, adapting to humanity's tactics and countering with overwhelming force. General Martin stood once again at the command center of the Vanguard, his eyes scanning the chaos unfolding on the screens before him. His fingers gripped the edges of the console as the entire ship trembled under enemy fire. "We need to hold them back long enough for the second phase of the plan," he muttered to himself. "We've lost more ships on the outer rim." The voice of the tactical officer rang out, barely audible over the alarms blaring throughout the command center. "The enemy is closing in on our flanks." Captain Dawson, standing beside him, looked at the screens showing their rapidly dwindling numbers. The Vanguard itself had suffered multiple hits, its shields flickering dangerously close to failure. Yet the crew aboard the ship remained focused, their determination unwavering. "We need to make a move, General," Dawson said, her voice strained but steady. "If we wait too long, We won't have enough ships left to carry out the second phase. We won't be able to get close enough to deploy the stellar disruptor again." Martin's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. He knew she was right. They had one shot at this, and it was now or never. "Prepare the secondary fleet," he ordered. "The one we've been hiding in the nebula. It's time we brought them in." Captain Dawson raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Are you sure? The nebula's too dangerous. The risks." "I know," General Martin interrupted. "But we don't have a choice. We need the element of surprise. If we keep fighting head-to-head with the Council, they'll pick us off one by one. We have to hit them hard, and we have to hit them fast." Without waiting for a response, Martin turned to the communications officer. "Send the order to the secondary fleet. It's time." Across the battlefield, Earth's remaining ships continued to engage the Council. Though they had scored a few significant victories, the Council's fleet was still relentless. Their strategy was simple yet effective. Overwhelming firepower. The human ships, small in comparison, were being picked apart. But in the shadows of the nebula, something stirred. The secondary fleet, a fleet of smaller, less advanced ships, had been hiding in the dense clouds of gas and dust. They had been kept hidden, waiting for this moment. Their only purpose was to serve as a diversion, and, if all else failed, deliver a crushing blow to the heart of the Council's fleet. The nebula, once thought to be an obstacle, now became the perfect hiding spot for humanity's most desperate forces. As the human fleet drew the Council's attention, the secondary fleet began to move. They cut through the nebula with surprising speed, their ships barely visible amidst the swirling gas and dust. It was a risky move. The nebula was filled with electrical storms and radiation, making navigation difficult. But in this moment of desperation, the humans had found an advantage. The secondary fleet emerged from the nebula in a dazzling array of firepower. Their weapons flashed with blinding intensity, catching the Council by surprise. It was chaos. The enemy ships had not anticipated such a sudden attack. For a few precious moments, the human ships seemed to have the upper hand, their unexpected assault disrupting the Council's formation. "Target their flagship," General Martin ordered as the new wave of human ships engaged the enemy head-on. The Vanguard had taken position to the side of the battle, its remaining shields barely holding, but now it could focus its fire on the most important target, the heart of the enemy fleet.